Grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. Another day the Lord has kept us, and another Wednesday has blessed us to be present in his house, gathered around his word, that we might find what it is God has to say to us in this hour for his glory and for our good, so that we might learn what it is to be like him, and that knowing what it is to be like him, we might find the strength and the courage and the help to expend every effort to make that happen. Let us begin our time as we commonly do in prayer. God, we thank you for the blessings of this day and for another opportunity for your people to gather a handful of your handmaid in your house with your word as the centerpiece for our gathering. Likewise, we ask your blessings upon those who engage with us by way of the miracles of modern technology and the opportunity that it affords us to send the word farther than we are able to go. Thank you for the measure of your knowledge and understanding you offer, that we might use our own ability to reason, to comprehend and apprehend these things, that our lives would be better as we offer ourselves in service to you. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. There's a few weeks ago I was in Outer Banks, North Carolina, and it was all in all a pretty good time to be there. But on the last day, we were on our way to a breakfast place, and on either side of the road there were these red flags straight out in the wind, just barely wiggling in the wind. And these flags, I came to understand, were the signs that it was a bad time to swim. That swimming at that time was inappropriate, was illegal, ill-advised, was crazy. And every now and then I'd have a flashback to signs that I've seen in the course of my life around oceans and rivers, some rivers, that say either beware of the undertow or watch out for the undertow. What in the world is undertow? Who knows what is undertow? Deacon Stokely. Deacon Stokely, where are you from? You need a microphone, girl. Say what?
It's when the water is a current, it's spread underneath the water, and it pulls you down, pull you under.
Current swirling underneath the water. Say, what'd you say, Deaconess? You gonna say what he said? Yes, Deacon. I'm sorry, Cornelius.
No, I was gonna say it's like a separate current from the main current that's flowing, and then you get a separate flow of water within that current.
And the issue is the water's always moving, and always moving in two directions. There's the water that comes in, and there's the water that goes out. Yes, Mary? Yeah. Mary's microphone is not working, and Al is going to make it work. She said it's the current under the surface of the water is stronger than the movement of the water at the nearest the surface, and the two create this, as it were, a vacuum or vortex, and the tendency of the movement of the water is to draw whatever's on the surface down underneath. So we call it undertow. It tows. I think that's what Deacon Stokely said. It tows under. It pulls you down, and that's what makes undertow dangerous. A swimmer can be pulled down under the water by undertow, and sometimes, depending on the ability of a swimmer, you can overcome the undertow. You can defeat it. Some people who are really confident in their ability in the water and really have a good sense of how the undertow works, manage to work with the undertow. And instead of having the undertow wreak havoc and only do bad things for them, they manage to get through and to survive the undertow. So undertow can be dangerous, especially for weak swimmers. We are going to begin a study tonight in the book of Judges for clues to help us to avoid the mistakes of the past. It happened in the case of the children of Israel, even after God had used first Moses and then Joshua to bless Israel. The nation repeatedly fell back in their ways. And as many times as they said, all that the Lord has said we will do, they really were not successful in keeping their promises. And not that God didn't keep his promises, but the people didn't keep their promises. And that's how it is. And so perhaps it'll be helpful to us if we look at what they did and what happened to them. It'll be helpful to us in avoiding their mistakes. If they did something good, we could do that. And if they did something that was not productive, counterproductive, no good, then we know we should avoid those things. You don't have to break your own leg to find out that a broken leg is painful. You can look at somebody with a broken leg and determine, yeah, that's painful. I don't ever want to go through that. So after God had blessed them the way he did, they still got themselves into trouble, and they were not able to swim against the strong undercurrents of their time. There were problems that were pulling them down. And the same kinds of undercurrents that pulled the nation down, the same kind of undercurrents that they faced, face us today. And so I brought you this sign: beware of the undertow. Watch out for the undertow. Now, intuitively, Mary started preparing scripture from the book of Joshua, because the book of Joshua is the prelude to the book of Judges. Joshua begins strong and it ends strong. We've used a verse from Joshua chapter 3. In preparation for battle, Joshua says to the nation, "Sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." And near the end of his days, near his farewell address, he challenges the Israelites to choose which God they will serve. He says to them, "Choose you this day who you will serve, whether the gods of your ancestors who you served on the other side of the Jordan, or the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord." So contrast the happy ending of the book of Joshua. It ends in triumph. It opens with the writer saying Moses has died and Joshua is the new servant. And now this book opens in much the same way. Joshua has died, and now it's time for God to do a new thing. And he does this new thing in a way that he has not done, taken care of the people of Israel before. He institutes a new office, as it were. The book of Judges pictures Israel suffering from invasion, from slavery, from poverty, and ultimately from civil war, from anarchy. Well, what happened? Why did they go from being on top, as they were at the end of the career of Joshua, to being so undone as they were in so much of the book of Judges? What happened to them was undertow. That's what happened to them. It was undertow. It's the facts of life that are always a threat. The realities of being alive. My friend says, "Ain't nothing to these old bodies," and she says that on a regular basis, and there isn't. But the same strengths, the same weaknesses, the same temptations, the same dangers, the same undercurrents, and the same dangerous movements of the water, the same whirlpools, the same storms, the same struggles, the same troubles they had getting along with each other, the same hungers, the same thirst, the same desires, the same temptations. Everything that they faced in the time of one generation is faced in the time of another generation. And what happens is as happens to most of us as individuals, once we struggle our way to the top, there's a tendency to forget how you got there. And there's a tendency to relax and to become complacent and to behave as though you know how you got there and that you have to always stay there because you arrived. But to do that is to forget about the undertow. The book of Exodus talks about a time when there arose a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. The Pharaoh who was in power when Joseph served came to love Joseph, came to trust him, came to give him authority and power so that he became a big man in a foreign country. But when he died, as time went on, the legacy of his past disappeared. It's too bad, but people just don't remember you that long. They want to, they try to, and sometimes your image rises, it increases, it improves after you die. But most of the time, people just forget about you. And when Joseph was gone, and a new Pharaoh came into power, the people didn't remember Joseph and how he had delivered the Egyptians from the threats that they faced in famine. Then after the death of Joshua came another generation that knew neither Joshua, and they didn't know much about Joshua's God, and they didn't care much about Joshua's God. And we're going to read this verse when we get to the second or third chapter. There arose another generation after them which knew not the Lord, nor yet the works which he had done for Israel. They didn't remember the Red Sea. They didn't remember crossing the Jordan River. They didn't remember manna from heaven. They didn't remember the quail. They didn't remember water from the rock. They didn't remember all the times they had been delivered. They didn't remember Kadesh Barnea. They didn't remember the golden calf. They didn't remember receiving the law. They just forgot about those things because they felt like they had arrived, and they felt like they were invincible. They felt like they were untouchable. So you would have thought that this would have brought them to a height of spiritual fervor and gratitude because of what God had done for them. Instead, they fell into a place of apathy. You know what is apathy? It's complacency. They didn't care. They were indifferent. It didn't matter to them. They were. It's not that they loved or hated. They didn't care. It just wasn't on their minds. Spiritual matters did not concern them, and so they lost their way. They had wandered, and they had found their way to a promised land. And when they found their way to a promised land, they decided that everything that they could hope for had been fulfilled, and they began living as though they had already arrived. But they had not arrived. They were apathetic. Instead of obeying the Lord, they moved to a place of apostasy. What is apostasy? Apostasy is giving up. Apostasy is turning back. Apostasy, Jesus cautions us against putting our hands to the gospel plow and then looking back. The book of Hebrews is a book about apostasy because the people who had been delivered, who had become Christians, found themselves falling back into their practices as Jews, as Hebrew worshipers. They fell into a place of apostasy. They fell back into their old ways. In the case of these people, many of them still carried the images of false gods in the pockets of their garments. They pledged their love, pledged their fidelity, pledged their faith in God, the God of their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But at the same time, they hedged their bets, as it were. They carried lucky stones and lucky rabbit's feet and other lucky items in themselves. Yeah, they worshipped the true God, and then they worshipped idol gods at the same time. They fell into a place of apostasy. They fell away. And instead of enjoying their standing in a place of law and order, a predictable place, they fell into a place where all of Israel was overrun by anarchists. What are anarchists? That's that crowd of people who engaged in insurrection at the state capitol on January 6th this year. I mean, the national capitol on January 6th this year. That was anarchy. That's when the rule of law was thrown out the window and people start making decisions that are inconsistent with the rule of law. They don't care what the law says. They do what they choose. And that's what happened to this nation, Israel. They fell into anarchy. Now, I'm suggesting to you that in our time, we are similarly vulnerable to the kinds of forces that pull us under, that take us to places of apathy, that take us to places of apostasy, that take us to places of anarchy, and we live above and beyond the rule of law. We act like we got ourselves to where we are, as though we had already arrived. We behave in a manners of indifference. We don't pay attention. It's as though when God asked Adam, am I my brother's keeper? And when Adam asked God, am I my brother's keeper? The answer had been no. But the answer really is yes. But we don't behave like we are keepers for one another. Instead, we behave like individuals. The signs had been posted. Watch out for the undertow. Beware of the undertow. They heard, but they would not heed. They didn't see the sign that said, swim at your own risk. There was no red flag stretched out in the wind saying this is a dangerous place to live. But this is a dangerous place to live. And now is a dangerous time to live. And we are threatened by the forces of undertow that threaten to pull us into the worst places. No one is immune to the forces that Israel opposed. No one is immune to the forces of the undertow. Life happens, and living comes with challenges as well as opportunities. And by studying the challenges and the opportunities that Israel faced, we're studying what happened to them, we learn what to look out for. What they ran into was invasion, they ran into slavery, they ran into poverty, and they ran into civil war. They refused to discipline themselves, which left a just God to discipline them. If you don't discipline yourself, God knows how to handle you. if you can't get it right, you can't get it figured out. It's like God saying, "Don't make me come over there. Don't make me come back there." Because when that's required, he's well able to handle the job. And so the book of Judges reports the story of the fall of a nation. In the first 2 chapters, and that's what we're going to try to do tonight, it's so much history that it won't be as helpful for us to go through the verses. The first 2 chapters, we're going to try to see how far we can get tonight. And I want to start with the early victories in chapter 1, verses 1 through 17. Now, don't be intimidated by these names. Come on, voice.
After the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord, who of us is to go up first to fight against the Canaanites? The Lord answered, Judah shall go up. I have given the land into their hands. The men of Judah then said to the Simeonites, the fellow Israelites, come up with us into the territory allotted to us to fight against the Canaanites. We in turn will go with you into yours. So the Simeonites went with them. Mm-hmm. When Judah attacked, the Lord gave the Canaanites and Perizzites.
Yeah. P-E-R-I-Z, Periz, Z-I-T-E-S, Zites.
Perizzites into their hand, mm-hmm. And they struck down 10,000 men at Bezek.
There you go.
It was there that they found
Adonai-Bezek,
and fought against him, put into rout the Canaanites and the Perizzites.
Okay. All right.
Adonai Bezek that fled, but they chased him and caught him and cut off his thumbs and big toes. Then Adoni-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off have picked up scraps under my table. Now God has paid me back for what I did to them. They brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. The men of Judah attacked Jerusalem also and took it. They put the city to the sword and set it on fire. After that, Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites living in the hill country, the Negev and the western foothills. They advanced against the Canaanites living in Hebron, formerly called
Kirath
Arba, and defeated Shishah,
good,
Hyman, and Talmud. From there, they advanced against the people living in Debir, formerly called
Kirath
Sephir. And Caleb said, I will give my daughter Asa in marriage to this man who attacks and captures Kirath Sefer. Othniel, son of
Kenaz,
Caleb's younger brother, took it. So Caleb gave his daughter Ashah to him in marriage. One day when she came to Othniel, she urged him to ask their father for a field. When she got off her donkey, Caleb asked her, what can I do for you? She replied, do me a special favor. Since you have given me land in the Negev, give me also springs of water. So Caleb gave her the upper and lower springs. The descendants of Moses' father-in-law, the Canaanite, went up from the city of palms with the people of Judah to live among the inhabitants of the desert of Judah in the Negev near Arad.
Are you crying? Don't cry. Okay, there's no crying in Bible study. Come on.
Then the men of Judah went with the Simeonites, their fellow Israelites, and attacked the Canaanites living in Zophah, and they totally destroyed the city. Therefore, it is called Hermah.
Okay, stop right there. You need a drink. Yeah. What do you notice about these 17 verses? What do you see?
They seem more apprehensive to do what God tells them to do, and they seem more about themselves than they are about God's work.
That's interesting. Okay. Anybody else? What do these verses seem to have in common? They collaborate. They find a way to get the job done. They find a way to be obedient and to cooperate with what they've been instructed to do, and they win. They win. In each of these, the verses, in this series of verses, what you see is they come out on top. Yeah, when you can infer from these verses that if God gives instructions and you follow the instructions that have been given, things will turn out like they need to turn out. Things will, the end will be the end that God desires. You could infer from that same notion that if you don't do what God says do, then you get what you get because you're out working on your own. And so without giving any authority to the guidance, the directions, the things that God has told you to do. So when Joshua was dead, perhaps there were people wondering about who's going to run things, who's going to be in charge now, how are we going to know what we're supposed to do? Because these are people who've grown up with Moses as their leader and then Joshua as their leader, and now Joshua is dead. who's going to lead us now? And they wonder, how do we know what we're supposed to do, how do we do it? Who will be the first to go up and fight for us against the Canaanites? And the Lord answered, Judah is to go. I've given the land into their hands. And then they got together, Judah, the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Simeon, and they say, let's help each other. You help me, and we'll get your job done, and then I'll help you, and we'll get our job done. So the Simeonites and the Judahites went together. When Judah attacked, says verse 3, the Lord gave the Canaanites and Perizzites into their hands, and they struck down 10,000 at Bezek. And they found a king there, fought against him, and beat him up. And they left him without thumbs and big toes. What happens when you lose your thumbs and your big toes? Huh?
You can't grip nothing and you ain't got no power.
You can't run and you can't fight because you need your thumb to hold your sword, and you need your big toe to balance, so if necessary you can run away. And so the next verse talks about how many kings. 70 kings, says verse 7. 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off have picked up scraps under my table. Now God has paid me back for what I did to them. And they brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. So here's a king who has gone into defeat, and he calibrates the numbers of people who have all kings, similar kings who have gone into defeat. The men of Judah attacked Jerusalem and also took it. They took another city. There you go. They put the city to the sword and set it on fire. They took another city. They're still being victorious. They're winning. And after that, Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites living in the hill country, the Negev, and the western foothills. And they advanced against the Canaanites living in Hebron and defeated Shishai and Iman and Talmai. Where is it? She moves, yeah, Talmai. I can't see that far. From there, they advanced against the people living in Debir. So here they are. They're either advancing or they're retreating. If they're advancing, what are they doing? They're winning. They're gaining ground because they're not retreating. So every time we see the language of their advance, we know they're still going forward. They're still winning. They're not losing the battles. They're not being defeated. They are still going forward, still getting ahead. They've been given this territory, and now they got to fight for it. They could continue to go on from there. They advanced up against the people living in Debir. And Caleb said, I will give my daughter Aksah in marriage to the man who attacks and captures this city. And O'Neill, Caleb's younger brother, took it, and Caleb gave his daughter Aksah to him in marriage. So here's a prize, here's a trophy, here's some incentive. Here's somebody who uses his daughter as a prize. That's a shame, ain't it? We will probably do that anymore. And then he seems to be, you would think that it would be Caleb who would go to his father-in-law. I'm sorry, O'Neill, Caleb, O'Neill who would go to his father-in-law and ask for whatever he wanted. But instead, it's his wife who goes to Caleb and says, what can I do for you? And she replies, do me a favor and give me some land with some water on it, so that you would infer from that the land that had been given was not as fertile, lacking the water resources that would be necessary to turn the land into what they might have imagined it could be, or maybe they got less water than some of the other tribes got, or less of the resources that they desired. So here's the woman asking for something instead of the man asking for something. That's kind of unusual, isn't it? Maybe not. And if you're in the 21st century, not at all. The descendants of Moses' father-in-law, Jethro the Kenite, went up from the city of palms with the men of Judah to live among the people of the desert of Judah in the Negev near Arad. And then the men of Judah went with the Simeonites, their brothers, and attacked the Canaanites living in Zephath, and they totally destroyed the city. Therefore, it was called Hormah. So now we have this report of the victorious activities of the children of Israel. They are winning, and they are winning because they are following the instructions that they've been given by God, following the directions that they've been given by God, and they are living in lives of obedience. Verse 18 says, you want to sleep on? Come on back.
I'm reading it on my phone.
Okay.
Keeping up with you.
I always thought you were going to read for me. The Judah also took Gaza, Ascalon, and Ekron, each city with its territory. The Lord was with the men of Judah. They took possession of the hill country. Again, they're winning, but they were unable to drive the people from the plains because they had chariots fitted with iron. They got somebody bigger than them, got somebody badder than them. As Moses had promised, Hebron was given to Caleb, who drove from it the 3 sons of Anak. And the Benjamites, however, did not drive out the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. To this day, the Jebusites live there with the Benjamites. Now the tribes of Joseph attacked Bethel, and the Lord was with them. When they sent men to spy out Bethel, formerly called Luz, the spies saw a man coming out of the city, and they said to him, "Show us how to get into the city, and we will see that you are treated well." And so he showed them, and they put the city to the sword, but spared the man and his whole family. He then went to the land of the Hittites, where he built a city and called it Luz, which is its name to this day. I want you to stop there, because here before they used the strength of their courage, the power of their obedience to the Lord's commands, and the strength that was within them, and the confidence and their faith to go up against their opposition. And they did as they were told. But now they're getting tricky. Now they get sneaky. Now they want help us to sneak in, help us to overtake, help us to get around. And so they begin to I want to say decimate, to minimize the instructions that they've been given, and to take corners, and things don't end up as well as when they were boldly going forward. But Manasseh did not drive out the people of Bethshan, nor Tanakh, nor Dor, or Ibleam, or Megiddo, and their surrounding settlements, for the Canaanites were determined to live in that land. And when Israel became strong, where's Mary? They pressed the Canaanites into forced labor, but never drove them out completely. I'm in verse 27, Mary. You with me? And when Israel became strong, they pressed the Canaanites into forced labor, but never drove them out completely. Nor did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites living in Gezer, but the Canaanites continued to live among them. Neither did Zebulun drive out the Canaanites living in Kitron, nor Nahalo. So these Canaanites lived among them, but Zebulun did subject them to forced labor. They went into slavery. Nor did Asher drive out those living in Akko or Sidon or Alab or Akzib or Helba or Aphek or Rehob. The Asherites lived among the Canaanites, inhabitants of the land, because they did not drive them out. Neither did the Naphtali drive out those living in Beth Shemesh or Beth Anath, but the Naphtalites lived among the Canaanite inhabitants of the land, and those living in Beth Shemesh and Beth Anath became forced laborers for them. I told you, the Amorites confined the Danites to the hill country, not allowing them to come down into the plain. And the Amorites were determined also to hold out in Mount Heres, Adgilon, and Shaalbim, but when the power of the tribes of Joseph increased, they too were pressed into forced labor. The boundary of the Amorites was set from Scorpion Pass to Selah and beyond. What's different in the second half of these verses. Verses 1 through 17 talked about their victorious living, and verses 26 through 36 talk about their repeated failures and defeats. Maybe in the beginning, when people feared the armies of Israel, and as time went by, they learned how to beat them. They learned how to fight against them. And they did come up against people with iron chariots, and that apparently had never happened before. And they did come up against people who were more entrenched and less willing to give up. And so they found themselves making concessions and living among people whom they were expected to defeat. Yes, Mary?
I'm seeing a pattern that go way back. And Moses taught Joshua real good.
But does she have a microphone?
Can you hear me now?
I can't.
I'm seeing a pattern that goes back because Moses did a good job of teaching Joshua, and he led well and led in the spirit. But he seemed to didn't teach anybody to follow him, and they don't seem to know about the Lord, and then they don't know even their own history, and that's why we keep losing, because we haven't learned to bring people close to Christ.
Haven't learned how to bring people what?
Close to Christ, close to the Lord, in his ways, not our ways.
Yeah, the formula for success. We fail to pass along the valuable lessons that we know. To imagine that a generation later, they would have forgotten the many victories that the Israelite people knew. I guess it speaks to the falling into apathy, falling into apostasy, falling into complacency. Yes, Reverend.
And it does take you back to when they were instructed generations back to write it on the doorpost, write it on the bed, everywhere. And they were clearly instructed how to keep it alive and keep the faith within each generation. And the further we get away from it, the more
I got you, Mary. Yeah, the more it seems we forget how we got there, and so I always indict my own generation for the failures in our time to hold our children to task the way our parents held us to task. We were much more, people my age were much more inclined to be permissive and liberal and to let our kids find their own way. And so I'm glad that mine found their own way, but it's not because I did such a great job, because in hindsight, there are things that I wish I had done with them and for them that I never did. And it was because I fell victim to the undertow of my time that said, let them try, let them do this on their own. Yes, ma'am.
And that's when you keep saying we fell into apathy. We didn't fall. We walked right into it, sleepwalked right into apathy, and our children then perished for lack of knowledge. It wasn't an accident. It was
a conscious decision.
It was laziness, and that we were trying to live, and we didn't teach. And one of the best ways to learn at a different level is to teach it. And now we just where we are.
Indifferent. Apathy, apostasy, and what else? Complacency. Okay. Anarchy. Yeah, where lawlessness. And so when you look around our world, what you run into is apathy, indifference, apostasy, even people who have been introduced to God, even people who have been introduced to Christ, even people who've been baptized, even people who have been speaking in tongues, find themselves falling away, and they give up what they learned in their youth.
And many times we can see it in our lives today, in our families, if we really want to look at it, and we can see how we were brought up, and parents would send their children to Sunday school and church if they didn't go, to ensure that they got that foundation.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's where the apathy begins. If apathetic parents, if you ain't really serious about it, if you act like it's not important, I'm coming, Mary. If you act like it's not important, then you won't be able to fool other people and make them think that it's important. And so, if you are an apathetic parent, you should expect that you'll have children who grow up indifferent. They don't take you seriously. They don't believe you. There's a Sunday you and the Monday you, and that 6-day you, that's the one they remember better than that 1-day you. And so it's the undertow that pulls at all of us, and if you're not careful, you'll fall prey to it. Yes, Mary.
I think you already got it, because I think Gladys hit the nail on the head when they say the parents didn't go, they sent the children.
Right.
The generation before, the parents did go.
Yep.
And the harder at times it was, back in the civil rights and in the people moving west, the parents were praying and teaching in the house, because it won't but one preacher once a month. And we were doing more. But that undertow, where the saints look at the saints, and the saints are saying, it's okay if you stay home. Mm-hmm. We say it's okay by the way we walk. Not just to our children, but to the other saints that we're supposed to be mentoring in the Lord. And the decay starts with us. That's why he's coming back first to talk to us.
Their children. So your children would be important to me. And what happens to your children, what your children do, would be important to me. We most of the people I can see, grew up in that kind of world, so that we've probably been corrected by people not related to us, and sometimes physically corrected by people not related to us, but not so in later times, not so in times after. And I'm not advocating spanking somebody's children, but I am saying that I want to have enough credibility with them so that if they misbehave, they won't boldly misbehave, as though I were not standing there, as though give me no respect, no regard at all. He ain't gonna do nothing. Say nothing. Or I know this about him or that about him, so he can't tell me anything. So you're not my daddy. I say, yeah, I'm not your daddy, but I know your daddy. Yeah. And so we go from this kind of success, these kinds of victories, to a series of failings, and we got to go through this in order to get to where we want to go and to get the juice out of Judges. We're going to start chapter 2, verses 1 through 15.
The angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim and said, I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land I swore to give to you, your ancestors. I said I will never break my covenant with you. And you shall not make a covenant with the people of this land, but you shall break down their altars. Yet you have disobeyed me. Why have you done this? And I have also said, I will not drive them out before you. They will become traps for you, and their gods will become snares to you. When the angel of the Lord had spoken these things to all the Israelites, the people wept aloud. And they called that place Bochim. There they offered sacrifices to the Lord. And after Joshua had dismissed the Israelites, they went to take possession of the land, each to their own inheritance.
Don't get trapped by that. That's a flashback. We're in the time of after Joshua. This is a flashback, a recollection after Joshua.
Mm-hmm. The people served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him and who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. And they buried him in the land of his inheritance at Timnath Harris in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gosh. After the whole generation had been gathered to the ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshiped various gods of the peoples around them. They aroused the Lord's anger because they forsook him and served Baal and the Ashtoreth. In his anger against Israel, the Lord gave them into the hands of raiders who plundered them. He sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. Whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them. Just as he had sworn to them, they were in great distress.
They fell into a place of separation. It's a cycle. And they are close to God, and then they are far from God. And they are more eager and anxious to be close to God when things are at the lowest point. And they manage because God loves, because God forgives, and because God restores. They manage to find their way back. But again and again, they are seduced by, or overcome, I should say, by the undertow, by the tendency to surrender to their own interests and their own desires. They find themselves physically and naturally enslaved and spiritually enslaved because they find themselves worshiping false gods and accepting and receiving false gods to live among them. And when you dilute your faith to that point so that everything goes, then it should not surprise that God would not reward, so that the benefits that they enjoyed when they were on top are now withheld from them. He says, I'm not going to go before you. I'm not going to fight for you. I'm not going to defend you. I'm not going to bless you. You'll be held captives by the people who you've already defeated. And the people the victories that you've won, you won't get to experience any of the benefits, any of the joys of that, because you just won't do right. And so in this place of falling away, it's a scene that repeats itself throughout history. People fall away. Jesus has warned us of a falling away that would take place in our time, and it begins with our disobedience, and it includes our indifferent living. It includes our inclination to apostasy and falling away, and it includes our appreciation for lawlessness or lack of lawfulness, so that anarchy reigns. It reigns everywhere, so that we are inclined to walk past somebody in trouble as likely as we are to walk up to somebody in trouble and to give them a hand trying to help them out of trouble. It's a cycle. It's the under the tide comes in and the tide goes out. And all the time you're watching the tide coming in, there's the amount of water that's under the surface that's going in the opposite direction. And so there is this pull, and the water, the deeper water and more agitated water has a tendency of creating suck holes. I don't know what you properly call them. It's like in the middle of the water, whirlpools that pull whatever's on the surface beneath the water. And if it stays there long enough, if it can't hold its breath, especially if it's a person, it drowns. And when we try to use the metaphor to think in terms of what happens to Christians who succumb to the tow of apathy, indifference, don't care, not my problem, or inclined to say, well, you know, I've done enough. I've done enough for enough. I've done enough long enough, and so it's their turn now. Let somebody else do it. And that's the kind of the ways that threaten our well-being and keep us from becoming who we might become if we could stay with our assignment. So we fall away. And that's what happened in Israel, and there's no reason for us to expect that if we surrender to the same undertow, the same forces that pull them down, that the forces wouldn't pull us down also, so that we too would be living in a land of lawlessness. In the next verses 16 through 23, we see divine mercy at work.
Then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of these raiders. Yet they would not listen to their judges, but prostituted themselves to other gods and worshiped them. They quickly turned from the ways of their ancestors who had been obedient to the Lord's command. Whenever the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was with the judge and saved them out of the hands of their enemies as long as the judges lived. For the Lord relented because of their groaning under those who oppressed and afflicted them. But when the judge died, the people returned to the ways even more corrupt. Then those of their ancestors followed.
Even more corrupt than those of their ancestors.
Following other gods and serving and worshiping them. They refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel and said, because this nation has violated the covenant I ordained for their ancestors and has not listened to me, therefore I will no longer drive out before them any of the nations Joshua left when he died. I will use them to test Israel and see whether they will keep the way of the Lord and walk in it as their ancestors did. The Lord had allowed those nations to remain. He did not drive them out at once by giving them into the hands of Joshua.
All right. What was the role of judges, the judges? Yes, Mary?
Well, first I'll say the role of the judges was to deliver, but I was captured by the last couple of verses. When we keep asking the Lord to deliver us and move us out of trouble, he set those nations against them so they had to walk in it a while. They didn't just have to do a few days or a few weeks. They had to walk in it for years to prove their faith.
The judges also decided disputes between the Israelites.
Yeah. There are two major roles for the judges. One was military, and the other was judicial. So as we read through the book, we'll learn how many judges were there. How many tribes were there?
12.
Yeah, so you figure there are probably 12 judges, right? One per tribe. So there were 12 judges from the different tribes, chosen and appointed by God to, as Mary says, deliver or rescue the people from their enemies and to establish justice and oversee the practice of the Torah among the Jews. So the judge's responsibility was more priestly than prophetic, and they spent their time making decisions to explain the observance of the law, make sure that the law was being properly observed and fairly observed among the Jewish people. That was the role of the judges, and that's the work of the judges, and they were, there's the list of them when we start to talk about them. How many judges can you name? Deborah? See there?
Who was the one with the mead?
Shamgar.
Who was the one that when they were drinking water with the mead, they were drinking like dogs and told them not to let them go with it?
That's Gideon.
Who was that left-handed one that sneaked up on that guy when he was in the back?
Shamgar. Everybody likes Shamgar. I like Shamgar myself. There's only one verse in the Bible about Shamgar, really, one verse about him. There's one reference to him, but his name is only mentioned 2 times. And he was a judge for just a brief amount of time, but it's not about how long you serve, it's about how well you serve. And he served well. And of course, everybody always remembers Samson, but we don't remember the other judges as well. But we will by the time we get to the end, because we're going to go through the book of Judges and learn some things about what the judges, each of the judges did. So Mary's on it when she talks about the way the nation got themselves into their own mess. And this, we come to the end of the 2nd chapter, and I would hope we'd be able to manage that tonight, because it's the setup for the rest of the book. But now you know what the problem is. Now you know what the lesson is. How does a nation, how do people avoid the traps, the forces that pull us under, that managed to be the undoing of the Israelites in the days of Samson and Joshua and Judges? How do we avoid slavery, and how do we avoid poverty, and how do we avoid civil war? How do we avoid the things that happen to destroy that nation, so that instead of living in disobedience, we would find wisdom in living in obedience, and instead of disobeying the directions, the guidance that God gives, we would learn to follow the guidance and direction more faithfully, and avoid the unhappy days that lie ahead of people who fight against God. So they found themselves in so many instances doing what Paul said he would never do. He said, "I'll never act like I have arrived, but instead I will look forward to and reach forward for things that are before me, and I'll stop acting like I've got it done." So Paul didn't fall into apathy. He didn't fall into indifference. He didn't fall into apostasy. He didn't give up, and he didn't fall into lawlessness. As a matter of fact, he said everything that's lawful is not helpful. It's not expedient. It's not good for us. So I don't do everything I can do just because I can. I don't give sin a quarter so that grace will have work to do. He said, that's not what I'm doing. So the lesson is repeated. It's the same lesson that we learn, that we read over and over, because it's the same life, because it's the same water, because it's the same undertow that takes us to places where we treat each other unkindly, we enslave each other, we have little regard for what each the other possesses, so that there's poverty when there's no need for poverty, there's hunger when there's no need for hunger, there's people who are victims of lawlessness in a land where we have enough strength in the body of Christ and in civil law to protect people from being taken advantage of by other people. We have enough going for us so that billionaires shouldn't pay less in taxes than we pay, than I pay. And yet we talk about lawlessness, but the lawlessness is not as much at this level as it is in high levels. Deacon Stokely would say there's spiritual wickedness in high places. And so Book of Judges is going to help us deal with that, help us learn a thing or two about that thing or two, and so we can beware of the undertow. We talked about disobedience tonight, and next week we'll go on to our next hashtag. We'll still be talking about beware of undertow. Watch out for the undertow. Thank you for being a part of our conversation tonight. We're so happy that you had time took time to spend with us. I missed my minister of music and worship tonight. I guess she didn't make it, but I'm glad that you were here, and invite you to join us on Sunday at 11 o'clock, right here at the same place and time. Our youth minister will be our preacher, and we'll have some recognitions for our children who moved forward in school, and some graduated from high school. One graduated from high school, one graduated from college. So we're going to celebrate with them on next Sunday, and Minister Abdullah will be our preacher. Thank you for being with us. Join us again 11 o'clock Sunday morning, YouTube, Facebook, parking lot, sanctuary. We'll be glad to have you, glad to see you. God bless you. Good night.